This is Current Reflections, a production of Tribal College, Journal of American Indian Higher Education.
For this installment of Current Reflections, we are joined by longtime Tribal College professor and scholar, Dr. Daniel Wildcat. I'm Bradley Shreve. A Yuchi member of the Muskogee Nation and a professor at Haskell Indian Nations University for nearly 40 years, Dr. Wildcat is the author of several books, including Red Alert, Saving the Planet with Indigenous Knowledge, and his most recent title, On Indigenuity, Learning the Lessons of Mother Earth. He has been one of the foremost thinkers on how the climate crisis affects Indigenous peoples and how traditional Indigenous knowledge holds the keys for many of the problems we face today, especially when it comes to food, energy, and water systems. He is a founding leader of the Hiawatha Center for Justice, the Haskell Environmental Research Studies Center, and the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Wildcat. We're honored to have you here to discuss our current theme, food, energy, and water.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brad, for the invitation to be here and talk about these really critical issues right now. So yeah, I'm glad we're going to be able to chat here and hopefully, share some ideas and that might help people figure out how we're going to get through all of this.
Yeah, it definitely feels daunting a lot of the time these days.
It does.
So let's just start off here. A question related to your new book. What does indigenuity mean as it pertains to food, energy, water systems? And can you give some examples?
Yeah, so I think what indigenuity means is, you've heard me talk about this before, is that in our oldest traditions of learning, our oldest traditions of community, our oldest traditions of technology, we always looked to those larger life systems that we are a part of, the land, the air, the water, the plants, and the animals, as really the source for our insights on how we might live well in a particular place. And I think with food, energy, water systems, first of all three are very much kind of tied together. But I'd start by saying that one of the things a lot of our tribal colleges are doing is, they are actively using USDA funds to advance, food sovereignty. And if you look at what, our TCUs, our tribal nations are doing, they're really going back to those indigenous foods, the foods that were a part of traditional diets, whether that be, bison on the protein side, or whether it be, vegetables, plants that were a part of our traditional diets. So, way before, we had contact with Europeans and the settlers. So I think food is an excellent example of where, again, we're taking our cue on what we should be eating, how we can have better, more healthy diets to promote wellness in our communities, in our families, from those ancient, traditions of hunting, of fishing, of gathering. And I think that's really exciting. So to me, that's, food is a very clear example where we can find, indigenuity being actively exercised. With energy and water systems, it's interesting because these two have been related, right? I mean, the great projects to dam the rivers in the Northwest was to, produce electricity, energy, to put lights in homes and provide electricity maybe to remote rural places that before the building of the dams might not have, um, electrical power. I think, again, what's interesting right now is we see, people in the Northwest, like the Klamath Dam removal that's just recently, been completed. And there's an excellent article, I think it was in the Guardian a couple of weeks ago about, the day they removed the dam, literally in the, within hours, the tribe started noticing the salmon coming up the river again. They remembered, this is where they're supposed to go for their food. And so the water here, which was used, thought of primarily as a source, for hydrological, production of electricity, now is being appreciated as, like it once was, a source for food for the salmon. And of course, it's not either or, is it? I mean, this is the point we're going to be really struggling to figure out. So you take a dam out, okay? Now, how are you going to generate electrical power? And so, looking at issues like solar power, the use of thermal heat pumps, and how you can heat and cool a home with the thermal energy that's literally under the ground, where you live. You can make use of that thermal energy that's in the earth. You can, solar power, wind power. So it's not a one size fits all kind of solution anymore. And again, I think that speaks to what we learn from the ecosystems we're a part of. A healthy ecosystem has plants, animals, the water, uh, everything, working in this kind of complex symbiotic relationship to create a healthy life system. And I think that's not a bad model for us to follow. So my dear friend Oscar Coagli used to like the Yupik scholar and elder used to like to talk about biomimicry. He said what we really need to do is engage in ecological and biomimicry. After all, we're a part of those systems, but we haven't been very good kin in those systems to our different than human relatives. So I think water systems, what's going on riparian ecosystem restoration, energy, I think all of these are going to be really ripe for exploration for our children, our grandchildren right now. And this to me is the place where we argue, look, we're not anti-technology. We're just saying we need to look at technology with a less anthropocentric lens and really a more eco-kinship centric lens. We're all related, so we're not going to look at the water, the land, the plants, the animals anymore as resources. We're going to honor them as we do in many of our indigenous languages as relatives, and treat them respectfully and responsibly. So we've got a little navigating there and some negotiation to do to figure out how we get this kind of natural balance restored. But I think that's what indigenuity is all about.
Great. Thanks for explaining that. Yeah, we definitely have a lot of, I guess, relearning to do when it comes to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, at times the environmental crisis we face seems unsurmountable, especially given that some people are still arguing over climate change, or at least don't see it as a major concern.
Yeah.
So, in your book on indigenuity, you discuss the need for a cultural climate change. Can you explain what that means and how we achieve it?
Yeah, so I think it's starting to happen in a lot of places already, Brad. I think so. Think of the cultural changes just putting on a different lens. You're going to see things and understand them differently. So, what I mean by that is, you know, the cultural climate change we need is to back off, as I mentioned earlier, that totally anthropocentric view that has really fostered a lot of innovation, a lot of technology. I mean, it has produced a lot of, we might say, good things, but it's interesting that the good things are all directed towards one species, the human species. Hence, we are anthropocentric. We live now in the age of the Anthropocene. It's all about humans, what we do. And so the change I'm arguing that we need on indigenuity is to reframe, and here's the one I'll use, the obvious example. It kind of relates to what we were just talking about with food, energy, and water systems. We keep wanting to rely on our technology to solve our problems. Now, no, our technology, human built technology. And what I would suggest to you is that this is part of the problem, is that we have exclusively defined progress anthropocentrically. Progress is about our human comfort, our convenience, our capital gains at the end of the day. Is it good for my checkbook or my bank account? And I would argue that what we need to back off and say, technology is just a means. And the problem is the means we put it to has been very anthropocentric. We need to now go back and consider an ecological, a kinship lens, and indigenous lens. I would argue that's one of the key features of indigenous worldviews, a sense of kinship, of deep relationality with life around us, an ecological kind of sense of life. And so in place of human comfort, convenience, and capital gains, here would be the shift, I would argue. We have now, I would advocate, some great opportunities to develop technology that we say advances community. Oh, by the way, now we're using an indigenous notion of community, not just the human community. We're talking about the whole life system that we're a part of. That's our community. The land, the air, the water, the plants, the animals, they are part of our community. And as modern evolutionary science tells us, as we have said for thousands of years, we are indeed related. We are kin. And so we would now have technology that seeks to promote community, that seeks to promote culture. Is the technology we're engaging enriching a culture that is emergent from these symbiotic relationships with plants, animals, places? They matter. That's why our indigenous peoples' cultures are so diverse, because they emerged out of these ancient symbiotic relationships between a people and a place. So now I'm saying, let's talk about technology that enhances community, okay, that enhances cultures, not a culture, cultures, different peoples, different places, and most importantly, really promotes communication. I think probably one of the most troubling features of the reality that we're all part of now is the degree to which we're finding that much of the uh, communication and information technologies, that we are using now are very prone to being used to misguide people with misinformation, or some people would say disinformation. And so that's not a healthy communication when people are misrepresenting or actually lying to you. And so I would say we're going to have to reframe the technology to say, hey, the bottom line isn't just, how we humans think we can use it to promote our power, our position, our, deepen or give us more money in our pocketbook or bank account, but rather, can we reframe technology to say it's all about community, an ecological kinship sense of community, where we know what we do does affect the water, does affect the air, does affect the land? Can we strengthen cultures, multiple cultures that, uh, have a long history with a emerging out of a different relationship between people and place? And then last but not least, maybe we can address the communication issues, this kind of you know room full of mirrors we're living in right now, where you really don't know, often people don't know what to believe because they're getting so much different information from different uh, places on the planet, different people, and sometimes their interests are not really in the best interest of life on this planet. So it's a big challenge, but that's part of this cultural change I think we need. We just reframe technology, reframe science, so that we really are looking at it through this new lens.
Thanks for that. Yeah, one of the things I've always appreciated about your writing is that the hope that you offer readers. And but sometimes I find myself drifting towards the worst case scenario, in my worst moments. And so this next question kind of, I guess, is the kind of big bad question in that regard. So we're locked into a certain amount of climate change, but you offer hope, noting that it's not too late to avoid total disaster. Is there a point where it would be too late? And if so, when would that be?
Well, this is a really good question, and here's what I think. I think that right now we've got to really take drastic steps. If we so right now, we used to think, the tipping point's 1.5. Well, we're there, basically at 1.5 centigrade now. So now they're trying to say, well, we've got to keep it below 2.0 centigrade by, you know, 2100. We can't let it get above 2.0 degrees centigrade. Well, I got news for you. I mean, that's not good enough. We're like what we're seeing right now with the hurricanes, what we're seeing with, fires. I mean, you name it. We have a lot of people on the planet right now who have experienced very dramatically, in a very damaging, a very deadly fashion, global climate change. The northeastern United States has been hit in an unparalleled manner by two successive hurricanes in a short time, a matter of weeks. And you know, the damage there is it's hard for people to really fathom, I think, even with the pictures they see in the news of what this is meaning to people's lives. So people in the United States are starting to really feel this. Some of our relatives in the Intermountain West and, you know, have felt this for a decade now with the large fires that have burned in the American West and throughout, you know, the Sierra Nevadas and through California and then clear, you know, to the Rocky Mountains. So I'll be honest with you. Yes, you're right, Bradley. I always try to be hopeful. And I guess what the position I take now is, I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but I'd ask them to just Google this. Google something called Climate North Star. If you'll just type it into your search engine, Google Climate North Star. These folks, really good folks, and they've built on a paper that was written by James Hansen, you know, one of the leading climate scientists who worked for NASA for years. And they're building on a paper that's been almost ignored by the general public. And it's called A Young People's Burden Requirement, A Young People's Burden, requirement of negative CO2 emissions. And what they're arguing is that what our goal should really be is a climate North Star. Here's what we should be seeking to achieve. I say, and I think they're right on target. So this is my position now, okay? We need to reduce global average temperature as close to possible to 0.5 degrees centigrade. Now we're almost at 1.5 now, and people are saying, oh, we've got to keep it below 2.0. The people with the scientists with Climate North Star are saying, look, this would be catastrophic. If we go any higher, and if we, heaven forbid, if we get to 2.0, I mean, you know, the kind of catastrophic activities we'll see on our planet, you know, across the world are, you know, almost unimaginable. And they're saying we need to take very radical steps to set a new goal. And that should be, rather than 2.0, we should be saying our goal is to give ourselves the rest of this future century to 2100 to reduce the global increase in temperature to a 0.5 Celsius temperature finding. That's 0.5 above the temperature we had on the Earth before the Industrial Revolution. And I think that would be my, at this point, that's my prescription too, is that we've got to really start focusing on our children, our grandchildren, you know, in our traditions, Bradley, we talk about those 7 generations. Now is the time for us to say we cannot let the global temperature get any warmer. In fact, let's not kind of just, you know, try to take half measures and half steps and say, well, we'll just try to keep it below 2 degrees centigrade. No, let's set a real North Star for our children and say what we'd like to do is in the next, you know, 80 years or so, reduce the global average temperature to 5 degrees above pre 0.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. We got to do that as fast as possible and try to accomplish that by 2100. That's my assessment, because I think right now we're headed for some very catastrophic activity on the earth. You know, the earth systems move slowly. And so I just want to, I want to be realistic, but again, I am hopeful, because everything that I talk about, everything that people like James Hansen and other climate scientists talk about, it's doable. We've just got to summon the will, the conviction to make it happen. And that's hard. Our systems are large. Our systems are very, very well established. And I think this is something that it's going to take, nations, it's going to take communities, it's going to take just everyone coming together and saying, we cannot afford what's coming in the future if we continue on the path that we're on. It will be very devastating. So I'm saying we got a new goal, okay? And that is forget 2.0 centigrade, and let's set a goal in the next, before we hit 2100, to reduce the average global temperature on the planet to only 0.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. So we'd have to reduce from where we're at now 1 degree centigrade from where we are right now. And that's going to be really critical if we want to really have a healthy planet.
In 1970, the Earth's population was around 3.5 billion people. Today, it's over 8 billion and growing. When it comes to food, energy, water systems, this kind of growth just seems unsustainable.
Yes.
How do we continue to adapt? And can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so this again, I would say we start really again thinking about our histories, what we've learned, what we've experienced, and indigenous peoples have rich histories. And here's where again we go back to this. It's just all this question of deep relationality. What's the character of our relationality? It's been argued by more than a few people who look at world population and food to argue, the problem with food on the planet isn't that we can't grow enough or we don't have enough. It's the systems through which we sell, we transport, we move food that, causes a lot of the problems we have today. Now, all of this is extremely exacerbated by the warming of the planet. Our agricultural sector of our economy is extremely sensitive to this global warming that's going on. So here's what I think we need to do. I think we need to where nations have it within their ability to really think deeply about maybe population growth and how they might address that. I'm not worried about indigenous people's population growth, because we've experienced such genocide around the world over the last 5 centuries that it is time for us to grow our indigenous populations again, and particularly with people who have an indigenous worldview. That's important, because that's kind of what I'm promoting here. We need this kind of indigenous understanding. So I think we can't. So here's where I'm hopeful. we can adapt, but it's going to mean we change our whole relationship with food. We're in a fast society. Everything has to be fast. And if you're not fast, then in our society, you're considered a loser, right? And what I would suggest is we need to kind of thinking that, well, one of the problems with going real fast is you lose a lot too. You lose time to appreciate relationships, maybe even sometimes our own relationships with other humans. But I think it's time now for us to consider what we can do to go slower and to really think about particularly human population, feeding people, how we do that. And it may be that what we could do is with really very modest investment, redirecting our priorities from trying to extract every bit of carbon energy out of our earth to saying, how can we focus on doing more traditional kinds of agriculture, traditional foods, encouraging people to have the wherewithal to grow what they can for their diets locally. And, that's some of these things are not, it's actually not that terribly radical. It's just that we're in systems that don't promote that. We're in systems that see all of that tell you all of that is a disadvantage, and that we live such a hurried, fast life. We need fast foods. Well, maybe we need to slow down a little bit and do more growing of foods, not monocrop, big corporate agriculture, but returning to literally, family farms, as our tribes are doing in the Great Plains, bringing the bison back and building a sort of bison economy of sorts again. And so I think it's not going to be. Part of the problem is the systems we're set up in do not promote that kind of activity, but it also leads us to sort of a self-sabotage. We don't even start things because it's been sold to us that we can't do those things. And I think what we're beginning to see in our tribal nations, people are saying, well, wait a second. We can do those things. We can take a dam down to bring back the salmon. We can, at Salish Kootenai, have reintroduced the bison and feed our people, with the bison. All of these kinds of things I think are really critical right now. And I think population is an issue. I think that many nation states around the world probably do need to look at how they're going to address population growth. But I'm not going to suggest that that is an indigenous problem. It only becomes a problem for us because there are so many of the people in the world that are thinking in that very anthropocentric way that I'd like to have a lot more children in the world who are brought up in a culture looking at the world in a very different way, in a deep relationship way. And that would be good for us. So yeah, we need more indigenous children in the world, and we need to get them using science and technology through their tribal lens. And that would be indigenuity.
Daniel Wildcat is a professor at Haskell Indian Nations University. He's also the author of the new book On Indigenuity, Learning the Lessons of Mother Earth, from Fulcrum Publishing. We'll be back with this installment of Current Reflections in just a moment.
Yate, this is Marvin Tom, the advertising coordinator for the Tribal College Journal. Since 1989, TCJ has earned a loyal following of readers who are passionate about American Indian education. Our dynamic media outlet reaches a diverse, wide-ranging market, including students, educators, and lawmakers. And here's the best part, TCJ offers a variety of reasonable price advertising options that can be placed in our magazine, on our website, or right here in our Current Reflection podcast. For more information, contact me at 970-764-4238 or at marvin@tribalcollegejournal.org. Yeah.
You're listening to Current Reflections, and I'm speaking with Daniel Wildcat about food, energy, and water systems. You've advised that we need to pay more attention to and learn lessons from our non-human relatives. At the same time, you note that the average American will spend just 7% of their
Yeah.
lifetime outside. And that's probably walking from the home to the car to work or the grocery store.
Yeah.
How do we change that paradigm? And once folks do get outdoors, how can they best learn from nature?
Well, the first thing you got to tell them to do, don't take your phone with you and put in your earbuds to listen to your favorite music while you're walking. Okay. Take your earbuds out and just listen. Listen to the world out of doors, and you will learn a lot, and I would, by the way, I would argue this is an exercise everyone should do, whether you're living in a middle of an urban area, whether you're living out in the country, whether you're living on a lake or on the ocean, but re-engage all of your senses again in the world out of doors. And you would be surprised how much how you start to feel when you breathe deeply, and how much you gain, how much information you gain from paying attention in that way. I like to use the example of, I had a beautiful shepherd and husky mixed dog um, uh, for a long time, and I would take her. Frosty was her name, and I'd take her out for walks, and we would walk really right after the 10:30 news at night. And this was in the winter too, winter, summer, all 4 seasons. But we'd take a night walk. And I lived in Lawrence, Kansas, kind of a small college town, but we'd walk around our neighborhood. And what I began to realize is once I started taking those walks, and I talked to my wife about it, how much I remembered taking those walks about my childhood. So I could tell so much about the weather by just how my footsteps sounded. You know, in November, you get a snow, and the snow's kind of squishy under your feet, but you don't really hear a lot. In December, late December, January, you get a snow and it gets really cold, and every step you take, it's a crunch. You hear the snow crunching under your feet. And even, the way it smells out of doors varies season to season. And it just I think the key thing that we do is get re-engaged so we begin to understand that there's so much that we can acquire in knowledge, in a feeling, in a sense of place, by just being mindful, listening, smelling deeply, tasting, touching, breathing. I love the way the seasons each have their own scent. And and that may sound crazy to people who aren't outdoors, but if you talk to anyone who's outdoors, they can tell you, you know, uh, particularly in the kind of, mid latitudes where I am, you can smell those seasons. And I think that's the kind of thing you've got to care about your place to take care of it and really be mindful of it. And so getting out of doors is the best way to do that. And, that may seem a little bit, oh, people are saying, oh, that's a little bit too touchy feely, or, I don't think about it that way. But I would argue that if they just go out, walk, take the earbuds out, and just soak it up, soak that experience up, you'd be surprised. What you learn about a place, and the kind of sense of place that begins to grow within you and your connection to that place. That's not romantic. That's real. That's experiential, and we need more of that.
Well, you're making me want to go on a hike like right now. So.
See, now that's the good reaction. See, that's what makes you say, why am I doing this interview here? I want to go down to the wetlands and just walk around. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and fortunately, for those of us who live in, I think more in the West, we have much greater access, to nature than a lot of folks living in more urban places. But
Yeah.
So I was reading this article recently in the Atlantic, and it was
Yeah.
called "A Dispatch from the Near Future."
Uh-huh.
And George Packer, the journalist, he delves into the environmental crisis facing Phoenix and the Valley of the Sun.
Yeah.
And he frames the conundrum there as a microcosm of the greater climate crisis.
Yeah.
He describes the tremendous growth in the Phoenix metro area, noting that everywhere you look, there are these trains and new building projects underway. Yet, of course, he points out that Phoenix faces acute water issues.
Yes.
So researchers at Arizona State University are studying various possible solutions. Everything from massive solar-powered desalination plants that pump in water from the Gulf of California to new technologies that extract water vapor from the air. So, in your estimation, is Phoenix doomed to collapse? To what extent can new technologies solve the climate crisis?
Well, so here's the short answer to a very good and provocative question. The short answer is, I don't think that Phoenix, with the size of human population that keeps moving there, the kind of growth they're having, can continue much longer. That at some point, that kind of megalopolis really that's been created down there, connected by cars, connected with this great use of carbon energy, and with such little access to natural aquifers and water, I don't think it can continue to grow like it is doing. And I think it will change very radically. Probably I don't know that I'll live to see it, but I think people who are maybe, just graduating college, and if they hang around there for the next 25 years, that the Phoenix, that whole megalopolis kind of growth down there, they will see that come to an end in the next 25 years. This is this is the problem. We want to change everything but our behavior. So remember, there were people who built the first footprint of Phoenix, the Hohokam, who were there, for at least 2,000 years. But by the time the settlers got out there, the Hohokam were gone. Why did they, where did they go? Well, they went back into the desert to live in smaller, sustainable groups. And they realized that they could not maintain a couple of bad droughts, and that irrigation system, as well as it was designed, could not provide water to the large sort of semi-urban population that grew up there, on Phoenix, in really where Phoenix sits today. The Hohokam was the homeland of the Hohokam people. And I think that this is going to be the challenge. I think right now people, and I know people are still moving there, but I think we're going to see a change maybe within the next decade of that population growth and that migration into the Phoenix megalopolis. I think it's going to start, they're going to see people moving out, because 100 days over 100 degrees from June through August, that's a pretty heavy toll on people. And it comes at a real high cost too, right? For the air conditioning you need to keep people cool and living comfortably in that place. So yeah, I have not read Packer's article, but I'm going to do it. Thank you for mentioning that, Brad. But I would say, if he's saying that Phoenix may be a microcosm for the greater climate crisis, I would agree. I would say it definitely is. And I'd say, again, people can live down there, but they're going to have to live very differently. They need to live in a way that fits that place. Smaller populations, less demand on water, and you can do a kind of agriculture that could feed people in small communities there. But the concrete, asphalt, paved world of the Mesa, Phoenix, Tempe, megalopolis, I think its days are numbered. I'm willing to suggest we'll see a major shift in population out of that area in the next 25 years. So I may not live to see it, probably won't live to see the largest part of it, but I could live to see that shift start before I start my journey to the stars. So I think it may be a very good, microcosm of the problem we face, and that's us trying to make a place fit us with our technology, with our, tools, without thinking that maybe that's just a place we shouldn't have a large number of humans living, because it's not very sustainable.
Yeah, and I wonder, they'll probably need to jettison some of the golf courses and fountains. And
Well, now I can be honest with you here, Brad. My grandson, Luca, moved down there 2 years ago with a friend of his. He graduated high school, started junior college, wasn't for him, and decided he was going to make some real money, and became a plumber, an apprentice, and now is a plumber, and he's making a lot of money. He moved down there with his friend, got hired immediately, and he says they're building like crazy down there. They are. And I asked him, I said, Luca, I said, I saw him just a couple of weeks ago. He came home to visit, and I said, Luca, I said, what are you going to do for water? And he says, I don't know really. He said, I've heard that the rule now is you can't do new building unless you can demonstrate that you're like housing developments, unless you can demonstrate that you have a plan to have water for the next 50 years. And I said, well, that's at least one small step, but I said, here's the problem with that. We don't know what the water table, what's happening to the Colorado with the great demand that's increasingly being put on the Colorado River. We don't even know what its levels will be like next summer because it depends on what happens in the mountains this winter. And so it's a natural system. It fluctuates, it's not something we control. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be a real, I don't think the growth that they're experiencing can continue. And I think you will definitely, I think you're a little younger than me. You'll definitely live, I hope to, well, I don't hope that you're going to live to see it, but I hope you live long enough to appreciate a lot of things. But yeah, it's 25 years. I think it'll become very clear that Phoenix can no longer, that whole megalopolis around Phoenix can continue to grow, and it will become very obvious to people.
Yeah. Well, I just have one last question for you. As far as indigeneity relating to food, energy, water systems, what role do you see tribal colleges and universities playing?
Well, they have a tremendous role. And I apologize, Brad, if you've heard me tell this story before, but my dear friend and mentor, and the person who remains the most important scholar and elder influencing my work, Vine Deloria Jr., we became very, very close, the last 2 decades of his life, and one of the last phone conversations we had, this was right before he was going in for his surgery, to deal with some of the health issues he was addressing. And we had he called me, which was first unusual, but when he called you, you knew it was important. But he called me and we started a conversation and talked about a lot of things. In this conversation, he related to me, oh, I just wanted to let you know I'm going for this surgery. It's not a big deal and everything. But we had never talked about, his health or anything, but he was letting me know that. He said, but here's something, I think we ought to do. We got to get some really bright people together and we got to just have a meeting and talk about, as he said, important things. And in the course of that meeting, we started talking about, well, where should we do this? And this was one of the times where I was surprised. Vine was very was saying, I think that the kind of conversations we need, the kind of work that we need to really start, we really got to set out an agenda for how we can address some of the incredible problems that we're now facing. And he said, this is the work that will happen in tribal colleges. He said, it won't happen at ASU. It's not going to happen at University of New Mexico. It's not going to happen at Colorado. It's not going to happen at, University of Washington. He said, we need to engage, our tribal people in these discussions at their colleges. And he said, this is where this work can really take root and where it can happen. And I've believed that, for the past 36 years. It was nice to hear Vine, articulate that so clearly that, hey, this work, we need to do these meetings at tribal colleges. And of course, he didn't live to get to see, that meeting come to fruition. But, shortly thereafter is when I formed, the Tribal College and University Climate Change Working Group. And we started meeting at tribal colleges, and that morphed into the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group. So I've really tried to do that, and I believe that with my heart and soul. This is the work that we need to be doing. Indigenuity, drawing on our own intellectual traditions, wisdom, and knowledges to help solve problems we didn't have a big hand in creating, but we just might have at least something positive to contribute in addressing some of the complex problems in the world today.
Oh, that's great. And thank you for sharing that. And thanks for this, joining us for this interview. I know everyone will find this very enlightening, and I'd be happy to hear from you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to visit with you, and I love the opportunity to share, ideas and thoughts with our, tribes and peoples, and most importantly, our tribal colleges and universities. I will mention just very quickly, we're having the first ever TCU meeting on children's health and climate change here at Haskell. I don't know if this program will even air before it happens, but it's November 14th. I'm really excited about that. We're going to have a one-day symposium just focusing on children's health and global climate change. And I think it's really going to be a neat meeting.
Yeah, important conversation too.
Yeah, you bet.
Great. Well, hey, you have a good one, and thanks again.
Okay, thank you, Brad. You take care now.
If you're interested in learning more about how tribal colleges and universities are confronting the challenges of food, energy, water systems, visit our website, tribalcollegejournal.org.
Current Reflections is a production of Tribal College, Journal of American Indian Higher Education. Thank you for listening.
Now da trachin in slon shin bashin, but Anita Shache Traban Dashanale. I am Marvin Tom, the subscription manager for the Tribal College Journal. Today, tribal colleges and universities are uplifting Native communities, and Tribal College Journal is their voice. So don't hesitate, subscribe to the Tribal College Journal today and help support American Indian higher education. For just $29, you will receive our quarterly publication plus the annual edition of TCJ Student, which features creative writing and art. It is as easy as a quick phone call or email. You can reach me at 970-764-4238 or at marvin@tribalcollegejournal.org. I look forward to hearing from you. Ahiya.